Hi, I'm Rachel Gray. Welcome to my cooking channel. The holidays are upon us, and so you might need to make a few pies. Today I'd like to introduce you to a new favorite, Streusel apple pie with caramel. I'm going to break this into a two-part video series. The first part is going to be the crust. So let's get started. I've got 3 cups of flour. I've got 1 cup of Crisco or shortening, and I have 1/2 cup of butter. I've got 1 egg. I've got 1 tablespoon of white vinegar, and then I have 1/3 cup of ice water and 1/2 teaspoon salt. This crust makes 2 pie crusts, so it's good for a double crust. For the pie that we're going to use, we're only going to use one of them, and then I can just freeze the other one until later, or I can just make 2 pies. I used a food processor to put this together. If you don't have a food processor, you can cut your butter and your shortening in with a pastry cutter or a fork, but it's quick and easy in a food processor. So I've got 3 cups of flour, and I'm just going to take the flour and put them into the food processor. And then I'm going to take my shortening. This is a cup of shortening, and I just use the sticks because they're easy. And I've got 1/2 cup of butter. And you want your butter and your shortening to be cold. So I just popped my shortening in the freezer for a minute, and then I'm just going to take them and cube them up a little because it's easier that way. Before I put my shortening and butter cubes in, I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Then I'm just going to use my pulse button and give it a quick mix. And then I'm going to throw my cubes in. Then I'm just going to put the lid on, and using the pulse button, I'm going to cut my butter and shortening into my flour and my salt. You don't want to over process it. You just want to cut it in until it looks like that. It's all crumbly. Now I could continue to mix these things in with the food processor and form a dough, but I find that it makes it a little bit tough. So for a tender crust, I just pour that mixture into a bowl. And then I'm going to combine my other ingredients into this little bowl. So I've got 1/3 cup of cold water. Now I had this and it was 2/3 cup full with ice in it, but I don't want the ice. So I'm just going to measure out 1/3 cup, just take 1/2 of it. And to my ice water, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. This helps elongate the gluten strands in the flour. It just gives you a nice tender crust. And then 1 egg. Then I'm just going to stir that, whisk that together with a fork, and then pour that in. I'm going to mix this together until it's just combined. And then you just want to work it with your hands. You want to work it as little as possible. This will help ensure a tender crust. And once your dough is together, you just want to go ahead and divide it in half. This dough makes 2 9-inch crusts. So I'm going to divide them in half, and then I'm just going to shape it into a disc. Now this dough is best if you use it right now. Go ahead and roll it out right now. You don't need to refrigerate it. But if you're not going to use it right away, then we're going to put it in a plastic bag, and you can store it in the refrigerator until you're ready for use. And if you're not going to use it for a few days, go ahead and put it in the freezer. So what I do is I take a Ziploc bag, then I take my disc, and I put it into the bag, and I will actually go ahead and flatten this out even a little bit more. This helps me when I go to roll it. Then it's halfway rolled when I'm ready to roll it out. I'm going to go ahead and roll out one of my pie crusts. I'm going to show you a couple of tricks that I use. So the first trick I use is I use a Silpat when I'm rolling it out. This just makes it so much easier. I don't have to worry about whether I'm going to get it off my countertop or not. I've got it on the Silpat. So I'm going to flour my Silpat. Just take a little flour and sprinkle it down onto your Silpat. And then I just kind of spread it out a little bit. Then I'm going to take my dough, my disc that I already did, and I'm just going to go ahead and flatten it even a little bit more with my hands before I get into my rolling pin. I'm just going to make sure that all of my flour, the back is coated with flour. Then I'm going to take my rolling pin and I'm just going to go ahead and roll that out. And I'm going to go every direction. And I will go off the edge of my silpat, that's fine. I want to roll it out till it's fairly thin. If it starts to stick, then put a little bit more flour on the top. So the next thing I'm going to do is just lift my silpat and put my hand right down in the middle, like that. Then I'm going to lift that up. Then I'm going to grab my pie plate and put my hand right into the middle of the pie plate. Then I kind of know that I'm in the middle where I need to be. Then I'm just going to peel my silpat off. And then I'm just going to gently lift the sides so that it can go down in. I'm going to try to do that so that it's all nice and even. Now I do have a lot of excess, but I also like a little bit more crust on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that and fold it over on the top. And you don't have to do this, you could just cut it off and then crimp it. But I just like a little bit more extra to crimp. Then I'm going to take a knife and I'm going to trim this off. Just make it even. And because my dough is soft, it's very pliable, and I'm just going to go ahead and try to make that as even as I can around, like a little rim. So once I have it like that, with the folded over the top, there's a couple of different ways. Well, there's a lot of different ways that you can crimp your edges. Two ways that are like the classic are you can put your fingers like this and then push it in like that, and that will make a crimp. But the way that I like to do it is I just squeeze it like that. I like this too because it helps if sides aren't exactly right. I can kind of squish them down to be where I want them to be. It's a little bit more rustic. This is maybe a little bit more perfect. That's a little bit more rustic looking, but I like it. And now our pie plate is ready to fill. If you are doing a double crusted pie, you obviously wouldn't crimp it until you had the top crust on. If I'm going to make a fruit pie that requires a little bit of blind baking before, I can go ahead and prick it with a fork and then use some pie weights or parchment paper with beans on it. That will also help weight it down so it doesn't bubble up. So there you have it, it's pie crust. This is perfect for the pie that I'm gonna make today, the Streusel apple pie with caramel. If you wanna see that filling, check out the other video in this series. You can find this recipe and over 200 other recipes on my blog, cookingwithrachel101.com. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Subscribing is free, and if you wanted to be notified every time I post a new video, hit the notification bell.